Welcome. Today we're here with Deborah Bush, who is the CEO of the Endometriosis Association New Zealand. And we are really honored. Today is the 100th anniversary of International Women's Network. And Deborah has won an award. And it's an international award actually put out by the WiN network in the States. And we're really honored that she's joined us at our presentation today here in Auckland at a beautiful location, which I will include some details of it in another video. But right now I want you to meet Deborah, and I want you to have an opportunity to hear what she does and why what she does is really important, that as women we understand. Because we've come a long way thanks to a lot of the work that this lady has done. So, hello Deborah.
Hi Roberta. Gee, it's such an honour to be here, and I feel incredibly blessed to have firstly been nominated for the award. Can I tell you a little secret about that?
Yeah, go.
Because I've been so busy over the last month. I live in Christchurch, and I think the world knows that we've been really devastated by some dreadful earthquakes in September. So when I got these emails over the last month saying you've won an award, my automatic reaction was delete, more spam, delete, because I just thought it was one of those things. Until a week ago when I thought, what is this? It keeps coming in my pathway, I better check it out. Well, I got a lump in my throat. And I had a tear in my eye when I opened that attachment and saw that I'd been recognised and nominated, in fact, by a woman and a friend in Singapore. And then that the nominations had gone to the US, and endometriosis and the work that I'd done had been singled out. So I feel incredibly privileged to have also been just reminded from my computer that it's a good idea to open this stuff when it comes in. What I first thought of was how important the work that we're all doing in the field of endometriosis, because when we think about the enormity of this health issue, no one is spared. No culture, no class, no country. So in New Zealand, if we start here, we're talking around about 110,000 girls and women who have endometriosis that we know of.
Tell us a little bit, what is endometriosis?
If I start and just say, look, it's one of these quite complex health issues, but if you can visualize the lining of the uterus, that's called the endometrium. And endometriosis is where tissue very similar to that is somehow or other found growing outside the uterus where it shouldn't be. So anything that shouldn't be somewhere in the body generally hurts. And sometimes I explain that to my very young patients in their very early teens, and some of them who haven't quite made it into their teens yet. You know, when you've got an eyelash on your eye, that really hurts. The eyelash is in the wrong place. It makes your eye go all red and inflamed and sore. It hurts. And it sometimes stops us in our tracks. And this is easy to deal with. And endometriosis isn't, because there's another part to endometriosis that we move on and say, well, how do you know you've got it? You can sure see what's going on here. But to actually diagnose endometriosis, that needs to be done by a laparoscopy. That's where they look with a laparoscope into your abdomen and they can visualize it. Now, not everyone everywhere has the ability to access those kind of surgical procedures. So while we can get a fair idea that someone has endometriosis by taking a really good medical history and sometimes doing an examination depending on their age, we don't always know. At that point, it's just a suspicion until it's confirmed with laparoscopy.
Wow.
So that's a huge issue in itself, isn't it?
And it is, and it's definitely, I mean, you were telling me earlier that the first written cases go back to the 1600s.
Oh yes, I mean this was recorded in the medical literature way back in 1690. And the thing about that is that back then they knew that it affected teenagers, it compromised fertility, had some pretty ghastly symptoms which they spoke about in really old English language. But you know, very well documented back then. And then it was kind of, we went through phases in our history of Victorian times and, you know, where we didn't discuss such things, war times and different reasons that women's health issues were often just swept under the carpet. It really wasn't that important, and what's more, it was highly embarrassing to do so. So, you know, this is a health issue that has been around a long, long time. Now, why we're seeing more of it today, it's more prevalent today, we're not sure. Is that because we're much better at recognising it? Or is that, and diagnosing it with laparoscopy because the surgical procedures are so much more improved? Or is it because there actually is more of it? I mean, there's different research going on right around the world, but what we know now is that and this was just a little pre-Christmas 2010 gift, so hot off the press, is that the DNA in women with endometriosis is different. We've always been able to say, hey, this runs in families, this is a family thing. Now we know that that can be confirmed, and we're looking at a genetic disorder. But, you know, I actually think it's multifactorial. That means there's probably a whole lot of other things that contribute to women and girls developing endometriosis.
So one of the biggest challenges in this whole area for you is recognizing and educating people to ask the right questions. And one of the reasons that you have been recognized worldwide is New Zealand, again, has developed some pretty unique programs through you, and you've been delivering some programs in schools and to women's groups literally around the world, because you've been to my home country of Canada, you've been to the States, you've been to Asia, you've been to all over the place talking about this problem and the programs that you've developed to actually help people be aware and to help them deal with it.
You're right, Roberta. I just decided that, I think it was that old Kiwi tenacity, you know, we just get stuck in. I think a lot of Kiwis call it the number 8 wire theory. You know, you see something that needs to be done, so you just go and do it. And I have a teaching background. I saw a huge need for young women to be informed about menstrual health. So not really endometriosis in itself, but about menstrual health, about persistent pelvic pain, about symptoms that were irregular or abnormal, so that they were armed with some information and knowledge that they could go and do something about it, and develop that really age-appropriate resources to fit with the program. So back in the early 1990s, I developed a little program called the Me program, because for those of you who have teenagers or know anything about them, they're kind of like a different breed. I think if you took menstrual health and endometriosis into schools, you wouldn't get much of a turnout. But when you develop a program that's kind of a bit funky and a bit fun, and it's interactive and it dovetails into the health curriculum, you start to develop something that kids want to hear about. And so the Me program was born. Menstrual health and endometriosis, all about me.
Sounds like a fantastic program, and definitely if girls recognize what is the norm and what's not the norm, then they're better armed to know when they've got a problem. And I think so many women don't know, is this normal or is this not normal? So how can they teach their children?
So one of the things I think that we say in the program is, look, if you're ever off school, if you're ever in the sick room, if you ever don't do stuff, because most teenagers know what stuff is. So if you ever don't do stuff with your family or friends because of your period, that's never normal. It's never normal, ever, to have painful intercourse, pain with sex. It's not normal to be sitting crunched over on the toilet with such horrible diarrhea when you've got your period. It's not normal to be having headaches that we sometimes refer to as menstrual migraines. I often find that tiredness is one of those symptoms with young women that just goes completely under the radar. So they might have a blood test, that comes back normal. Well, sorry, we can't help. Or they have tests to investigate those funny bowel symptoms, and then they're told they might have irritable bowel syndrome. Well, the bowel is irritated generally for a reason. So I like to think that anything that kind of interferes with your quality of life needs investigating. And you have to be a little bit persistent around there too.
And I guess it's appropriate that on the 100th anniversary where women have started to talk about health issues, and we've come a long way in pay, but around the world there are still women who suffer, and because they do, their children do, because their children do, men are suffering. I mean, it's
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
problems.
is this just a woman's problem? Absolutely not. This is a disease that affects the whole family. In fact, do you know, this is really interesting. They only separated out the science of gynecology from mental health in the last 100 years. So
That's scary.
I know. So all those things like it's in your head, you must be, well, of course we think that because it's really recent times that we grew up, or our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers grew up with that knowledge that we had to suck it up and we had to put up with it. So right around the world, so some women in some cultures and in some communities are more privileged in accessing the kind of healthcare that they need, and others are just simply disadvantaged. So we need education in schools, communities, workplaces. In fact, the whole field of helping women become more informed so that they can speak out, they know what's normal and what's not, and they can try and access the help they need. Because, there's a 10-year diagnostic delay with endometriosis. That's from when you first present to a doctor with symptoms to when you get a diagnosis.
Is there a treatment?
65, yeah, it can be, I'll talk about treatment in a minute, because I think if we think about 65% are initially misdiagnosed, if we think about the hit and miss treatments that women often go through, if we think about the fact that they need to go to a GP generally 4 or 5 times before they're referred to a specialist, if we think about all those things, that's entirely unacceptable. It's a disaster. It's not right, and it compromises fertility. So, is there a treatment? Yes, but it isn't always that simple.
Okay.
So for me, it's about looking at really good surgery by someone who specialises in endometriosis.
There's not many of those around.
There are not, and yet 176 million women in the world, if they walked with their feet, there would be more.
Wow.
If we look at a good management program, sometimes that can be medical management, like pills. There's no drug therapy per se that fixes endometriosis, but some have a pretty good calming effect on the disease and the symptoms. It's about a big chunk of self-help things. What can I do for you? What can I do for me? What are the nutritional things that I can do? What are the real things that I can access to help my symptoms be better? And the other one is the new one that I think the world is waking up to, is looking at ways that we address pain management with proper therapies, because this is about productivity. And I think too with men, if we think about, this is something that affects all our lives in the workplace. It's 11 working hours per woman per week in terms of productivity. When you have a look at bottom lines that suffer because of a disease, generally you want to do something to fix it, and I urge you to pop onto the Endometriosis New Zealand website. We've got 2, one for teenagers. Have a look at the resources that are available. They're quite innovative, and look at programs in your workplace and in your school that you could access. Now look, these are really limited worldwide, but we're happy to help where we can. So I would encourage you to see what you can do in your community first off to say, I'd like to do something about this, and we have an open door policy for you to contact us and make a difference for this generation of women and for future generations of our girls and our families right around the world.
Now I'm going to ask you to, this was your fundraising month, but given the earthquake in Christchurch, your major fundraising opportunities are not going to happen. So let's hope that the audience here is big enough and there are enough women out there who are concerned about their own health, the health of their daughters, their sisters, their work colleagues, that they'll look at contributing. How could they contribute to endometriosis?
You can contribute. When we think about the effort that we put into our major fundraising event in September, that fell over by the earthquake on September the 4th, which crippled our city. 5,000 earthquakes later, on February the 22nd, we were devastated again, and this time with loss of life in a sister city that's just in ruins. We were going to put on a wonderful event to do with the Ellerslie Flower Show, which is held in Christchurch, which is also in ruins. We've picked ourselves up and dusted ourselves off, and we've launched the Big Hug Appeal. I'll tell you what, if there was ever a time that we need a big hug, it's right now. In fact, we need a bear hug. You can go on to the Endometriosis New Zealand website. You can support our causes because we have world-leading programs. We've been doing what we can to address these issues around the world and introduce the programs there. After a 25-year history, we can't afford for this organisation to fall over.
Absolutely not.
Please help us. You can even download your own special hug, and you can redeem that with anyone wherever you like. So this is a great cause, and there's some things that you'll love to be part of as well. Join us on Facebook, become part of the surge to make lives of girls and their women, their mothers, their grandmothers different, and a chance to make family life better right around the world. Please join us on the Big Hug Appeal.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And any questions, there will be a link that they can go to get to the Big Hug below this video. So thank you for coming up and joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure and an honour. Thank you, Roberta.